Okay, it says we are live. Pardon any technical issues. Greg's not able to do a screen capture of our typical Hangouts. So I'm fielding the Hangouts on air, which Google canceled about 9 months ago, and seemingly still works to some degree. And so we've got on here, we've got Justin Wilson. Who doesn't have video, but he actually hasn't made one of these in a while. What's going on over your way, Justin?
Yeah, it's been a while since I've been on one. Actually worked out tonight that got a bunch of stuff done to make this, so we got it got on here at least.
Alrighty. We've got Nick Bergoglio.
Close enough. Braulio.
I would not have thought that.
Yeah, you know, where I grew up, it was Braulio, but the proper way is Braulio. So.
But so what is it that you do since you're new to all of us?
I'm a network architect, security architect for a bunch of different things. My day job is for the Department of Energy. I help build the service provider that connects all of the national labs together, but I've got just about 20 years in the service provider world, from broadband to WISPs and other things, backhaul providers.
Yet, and oddly enough, he lives somewhat in between Justin and I, so the two closest people in the boat is WISP, and he manages to fit somewhat in the middle.
Right in the middle of Illinois, in the middle of a cornfield.
But
or beans, depending on the year.
Sure. So I figured that like I've been trying to get one of these focused podcasts on DNS for quite a while, since many WISPs don't seem to understand it as well as they think they do. And somebody once again was on one of the Facebook groups, asking questions, and like, they were asking, decent questions for someone that didn't know anything, asking further information, things like that. So I thought that, I'd see if anybody was interested in chatting about DNS, and apparently I got a couple. So who wants to say kind of an overview? Obviously most of us are going to know the basics of DNS, but, kind of give a 30,000-foot view.
I think one of the things that a lot of WISPs don't realize is the difference between authoritative and recursive DNS servers, and what the ins and outs of running one versus the other. A lot of them I see run both their authoritative and their recursive on the same box, not knowing that they're really running the same. They install DNS and, oh yeah, I need to be an authoritative DNS, whether they're, using those functions or not. Right. So, that's one of the biggest, I think, things I see on a lot of WISPs, that, they're using GoDaddy or something like that. And so they don't necessarily deal with, what's an authoritative DNS. Someone else usually handles that for them. So when they dive into the DNS world, they're not sure why they use this versus that.
Yeah, that's pretty common, I think, not only across WISP, but in most smaller service providers, as well as even some enterprise stuff that I've seen, where it's an issue of operational expense of, do I want to run one machine or two machines ideally, or do I want to run like four? Right, so you've got your authoritative and your recurse, maybe a hidden master as a fifth. It's a resource issue. Like, why would I want to run some when I can just run one or two, and they play double duty? But there is a significant gotcha in doing that, which I think sort of comes down to one of the things about DNS that scares off a lot of people. It's runs it's a service as opposed to a transit path, like a network, right? You can build a big network, but if DNS, you can build a gold-plated network, but if you can't do DNS resolution, the network looks like it doesn't work.
Yep.
So it's one of those things that's like, it's a service that sort of is black magic if you haven't done it a lot. There's a lot of minor details and a lot of major details associated with it. And from what I've seen in a lot of smaller service providers, if they can get away with either not doing it at all, which is the most common, what I see, where they just pointed at the BBN 4.2.2.1 and 2, or the Google resolvers, they just point everybody at that, and then they don't have to do they don't have to manage the extra systems, right? But
yeah, a lot of these folks are, hey, I got a website, GoDaddy handles my authoritative for me. Then all of a sudden they start getting their own IP space, and they're like, oh, I have to have DNS entries for my reverse IP space. And that's what I find a lot of them get spurred on. I now have to do some kind of reverse entry for stuff to work right. I need to deal with an authority, and they've never had to deal with it.
Yeah, that's the super common. My experience is that, zones either just aren't done, even if they are, getting PA provider, provided address space from maybe their upstreams, as opposed to provider independent address space, which you get from your RIR, like Aaron or Ripe or whoever. They just don't do it. And so then you run into other issues with, services not working because they can't, reputational things in the security world require reverse DNS. It's all a yarn. It really is. DNS is a complicated thing, but it's easy to sort of just do the bare minimum to get, like you said, 2 servers that do recursive and authoritative, and you don't have to touch it anymore. I would argue that that's better from a WISP and a small service provider perspective than one of the free services, right?
Oh yeah. If you're running your own, whether you're running them, semi badly, is better than pointing it at Google.
Right. Which sort of points at one of the other topics that I wanted to bring up, and that, one of the most important reasons to have your own DNS server is for access to CDNs. Right. So access to CDNs, content delivery networks that are close topologically to you, even if you are single homed, it's even more important if you're multi-homed and you're doing, even if you're not doing BGP, if you're doing stack routing, both of them, you want to take the closest content for your Netflix, your Apple stuff, whatever else, your Amazon. But we dove right into like nitty gritty details for 5 minutes.
So we've got so there's 2 basic kinds of, well, I know there's a bunch of other things you can do, but the things that if you're watching this video for help, you can just limit yourself to authoritative and I call them resolvers, but there's a different word for them. What it's
recursive.
Yeah, so you can limit yourself to just those, those 2 types of servers at least. I know that, and so what the authoritative server does is when anybody does a DNS lookup, forward or reverse, it goes through the hierarchy of, if it's a forward lookup, you translate Google or bobsisp.com into an IP address. Then it goes to the root DNS servers, and then the TLD servers, the COM servers, and then to Bob's ISP to figure out what IP address you have, for your website. And those need to be reachable to everybody.
The way I explained it to a guy yesterday is, if you're looking for Bob's ISP, it goes out to the root name servers, and the root name servers have been told, here is who is authoritative for this domain. Here is who is, verified authoritative for this domain. This is where you go to find the answer. It's not, just go look anywhere for the answer. Go to the authoritative name server, because that's been registered with whoever the domain is registered with. It's a check and balance. The domain registrar has said, hey, these are, the authoritative name servers. I'm advertising that on the internet. And that's where the authoritative comes from. These are the only servers that are authorized to provide a valid response.
Right. And those, having those split out, as is, I think, an important thing, because as your clients do queries against your recursive resolver for both your stuff, you keep that locally at that point, and for the things that they want to resolve so that they can get the resources that they want, there is an aspect of keeping that traffic local that shouldn't really be ignored, right? For a number of different reasons. That there's the security aspect of controlling what the responses that get back aren't forged and things like that. There's creative things you can do with all kinds of stuff within all the name servers that are available. And it's really not hard to run them. You've got a number of different packages that you can use that are free, and depending on your skill level with the command line, there's also wrappers around them that will work as well if you're not comfortable with GUIs and stuff, or with CLI.
Maybe Mike can, since you started with the authoritative, maybe explain what recursive is before we get too further into some discussions.
And so the recursive DNS server is what you point your clients to for their DNS server that they first queried to get, who Google.com is or who Netflix.com is. That's what gets put into their router, which gets translated into their desktop as the DNS server. So that's the very first server that is hit in the DNS process, and so it's the one that's going through all the checking of, okay, someone came to me looking for Netflix.com. How do I work my way through to that? And those should only be open to people on your network.
Yeah, to who you want to answer the requests.
Sure. Be it firewall, be it configuration within the DNS server, or a combination. And reason being, well, there's several reasons, but the biggest one to me is, many of the DDoS attack internet that are bringing down these major services using various forms of UDP amplification, of which DNS was one of the first, and first used. And so by being open to the internet, they'll send your server a specific request to maximize the return to flood whoever they're trying to attack. And so you want your server to ignore all those people.
The way I look at it is an authoritative DNS server is something that has to be delegated from a central authority. If you're got your website registered with GoDaddy or somebody like that, they specify, or you specify within their control panel, these are my authoritative DNS servers. If you got IP space from Ripe or Aaron or somewhere like that, you delegate your authoritative name servers for your reverse entry. So it's pretty hard to really screw that up. So, when you're talking DNS, we don't necessarily, the stuff that happens on the authoritative side, you can't screw it up too bad, but you can screw up the recursive side, but you can also screw up the security on both, on recursive and authoritative if you're running your own. So one of the points I want to make is when people are thinking about this, don't necessarily think on, hey, the authoritative stuff, it's kind of hard to screw that up. You can screw up the recursive stuff, really bad, and you can screw up your security really bad.
I think that brings up an important point on another, terminology note that we should probably talk about. So, to kind of recap, you've got your, say you've got a service provider that's whatever, it's a WISP, and you've got clients or whatever. You have, have some sort of access mechanism, radius server, something like that. On top of that, you've got your DNS over here. That your clients hit the recursive resolver, which is you've architected that correctly. You've got, two recursive resolvers that you can that your clients will make requests of to resolve the names, like you said. But terminology I wanted to bring up is, in not configuring those resolvers correctly, they will be flagged as an open resolver, and what that means is that anybody from the world and use them as a resolver and cause, like Mike said, the amplification attacks. And there's actually a really cool project. I do have a point. There's a really cool project called the project, where you can actually go and you can put in your IP space. It's openresolverproject.org. And you say, here's my CIDR block, or you got to do them one at a time up to, I think it's / maybe it's 24. But it has a fair, okay, is it 22? It has a fairly comprehensive list that's updated very, very frequently of open resolvers. I would highly encourage anyone, even if you currently aren't running a resolver on your WISP, to put your IP space in there and make sure that some client doesn't have an open resolver on there.
Yep.
That can be a source of outbound denial of service attacks, which are yucky as the inbound ones, if not more so.
I just checked my space. I'm clean. Although I think I blocked DNS on my edge, so that's probably gonna happen.
Yeah, that's not a bad call. I mean, I've seen that written into AUPs. Not allowed to run a recursive resolver, period. And so we block UDP 53. So that's another important difference, right? So if you've got two resolvers, one's authoritative, one's recursive, think of DNS as port 53, right? But what they really mean is UDP 53. But that's only for your DNS resolution stuff. So if you're running a authoritative resolver, zone transfers are going to happen over TCP 53. They're different in more than just concept. They're actually different in execution too, and you can filter them based on that.
Now, what are your guys' thoughts on caching versus resolving DNS? That's a term that gets thrown around quite a bit too.
I don't have a strong preference. One is they functionally operate the same from a customer perspective. Both ways. I think I typically go as just a recursive resolver. But on sites that may have slower links, caching resolver has value in that it doesn't, it's caching anything, right? Look up once, reference many.
And that's basically what like the DNS server that's on the MikroTik does.
Yeah.
It just does caching. You're basically servers to go look at, doesn't have it in its cache. Whereas a resolver or recursive will, some of them you can configure, forward zones for them, but generally what they do is, they go straight to the root DNS servers and start working from there. Taking it, anybody else's input. They're building it from scratch.
Which I think that's where some people, we probably should do the what's the difference between root hints versus just looking it up on another DNS server. That's another thing I see folks do wrong. They'll set up a resolving DNS server.
Did we lose Justin?
I'm still here. Am I still here?
Sorry.
Yeah, we hear you.
I was just saying that that's maybe another thing we can make a difference from. I see people do a resolving DNS server, then they just point where it resolves to Google. So they really haven't helped themselves. So the difference between Google versus or AT&T or whomever they're pointing their DNS to versus root hits.
I don't think it really buys you anything, honestly. It's not even really a more simple config because you have to go in and physically change it. I never really deviate from root hints unless there's a strong reason out. I've seen folks that there's a really large school district that I did some BGP stuff for them because my buddy runs it, and they actually pay for the DNS service. They have a contract with them for content filtering because it's a K-12 system. And they still run their own local resolvers because they want to do things like resolve private address space and other things, which we should probably touch on as well. And they just point up to OpenDNS. That way, they kind of get the best of both worlds. They can run their own local zones, but then also take advantage of the stream content filtering that they purchase from OpenDNS.
Sure. Yeah. And then that scenario that where you're using OpenDNS or someone like that for your DNS content filtering is the only reason I can think that an ISP should be using an off-net DNS server. I mean, I can't think of any other reason why. Well, recursive. Anyway, authoritative, you can put that anywhere.
Yeah. I mean, I could see
if you set up, like CentOS by default, if you set up bind and you run through their wizard, at one point it asks you, what DNS servers are you using? So you actually have to make a decision to use root hints versus another DNS server. And by default, on most configs, it's use the other DNS server. So most people don't understand what root hints are, and they just say, well, I need to put in Google DNS for bind to do my lookups instead of doing root hints. So maybe we can touch on what root hints are.
Yeah, we should definitely explain that because that's one of the things that makes it art than science, right? Because it's this weird file that just has pointers to the upstream, the root zones, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Did you want to explain that?
Yeah, I mean, my definition of it's always been within a DNS server, you can, if you're doing resolving DNS, you can either say, hey, I need to look to other DNS servers, whether that be 4.2.2, Google, whatever. But the preferred way is the root hints file. So you have all the, the root name servers out there. I think there's what, A through G at the moment for the .coms or something like that. And they're hosted, all over the world. And so you want your DNS server to say, I'm going to go directly to the source. I'm going to go look, if I don't have it cached, I'm going to go look it up via these root hints. And it's just saying, hey, this is where you go to start the process of looking it up. So it just starts with A, and if A responds, then away it goes. Then there's some other black magic behind the scenes for load balancing and stuff like that. But it just says, hey, I'm going to go direct to the source. Where do I go to look up Google? And the root hint says you go here. So it's cutting out the middle person when it does the DNS lookup.
Right. I mean, basically what root hints is it's just the names and addresses of all the root servers, like you said, which are scattered throughout the world, anycasted, things like that. So, it basically says if I don't have it start at the bottom and work all the way up, starting at the, .com, and then, is it .com? Okay, well, here's my set of servers that have that, and then step all the way down through it. So it allows you to basically have a base to work from. If you put in something like servers, then all it does is just go and ask them, and it hands back whatever they say it is, which is not technically authoritative. Querying the next server up.
Sure, yeah, because if you have it doing caching or forwarding, you're not using root hints. You're just referring to somebody else that is using root hints. At some point, some server in the recursion process is using the root hints, so might as well just be yours.
Yeah,
just have to be the first one.
Yep. The takeaway is, when you're setting up your DNS, use root hints, not forwarding.
But
Yep.
And so then I know that Nick touched on it a little bit earlier about CDNs, but do you think we got what we've already done so far decently, or before we go off into that?
I think we should go into a little more detail, because to me, that's one of the biggest selling points for a small ISP, to use their own DNS servers, other than, say if you want to give forward and reverse lookups to private address space. So say your CPE is all, and
Sure.
you get for the public, maybe you want to have DNS resolution on that 10net space, so you can type name or your text. It makes it easier for everybody, right? And
Sure.
so that's another reason that you might want to run that as well. But the other the reason it has a $sign associated with it, to me, ends, because 95% of the traffic that a service provider is going to see is going to go out their egress to the neighbor. It's not going to be talking to a service that you have in-house. And people have tried to do things where they bring all that in, and it might work a little bit, but everybody wants their Amazon streaming, everybody wants Hulu, and that's all going to be provided by a CDN. And if you have one provider, you still want to hit the cache that's closest to you, rather than, say, a cache in Germany or something, unless you're in Germany, right? And the way most of the providers will steer that traffic is via where your DNS sourced from the DNS server perspective. 8.8.8.8 has no idea where I'm coming from, so it's just going to give me probably not the best cache solution. I hit my local resolver with an IXP that has, is sharing that information with like Akamai or whoever, or Netflix directly. It's going to say, oh, well, this is really easy. This service is going to be better. Your customers are going to be more happy, and it doesn't have to transit all these potentially long haul links and service worse.
Yeah. And that's one of the biggest things is that I made a blog post almost 2 years ago now on the Midwest IX blog about why you should use your own locally hosted DNS, and the highlight of that is that CDN performance. Those CDNs are conducting tests to whatever IP address, server IP address, queried them to find out where you should be going. Meanwhile, they do tests to your server to then tell you what node of theirs to talk to. And when we were working with some CDNs for on the IX, weren't seeing expected traffic levels. That was the first thing they asked about. Are your customers having their customers use a local DNS server? Because if you're not, all bets are off as to where your traffic goes. And that's why I keep beating home this whole local DNS server thing.
Yep.
For recursive, for authoritative, all recursive needs to be on your network. As far as authoritative, it's actually good to have one on your network and then one not on your network.
Yeah, really, authoritative can live anywhere in the world. The GoDaddies and those are prime examples of that. There are tons of websites that use, GoDaddy as their authoritative DNS, and everything's done through GoDaddy. I'm not really too up on how, GoDaddy's data center network is, how many they have spread across the globe and stuff like that. But, there's millions of websites, hosted on GoDaddy that use, or not necessarily hosted on GoDaddy, but use GoDaddy as the authoritative DNS, and they might point to another web host or something like that.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I mean, I personally do that for all my domains, which I have a shameful amount of. They're all hosted within Cloudflare, and Cloudflare's authoritative, and I can have as many sub DNS name servers as I want. I run one in the closet right over there, right by my fish tank, that is, it resolves all my local stuff here and some other stuff, and it's very flexible, I guess, is what I was trying to say. You can have your authoritative somewhere else, subdomain delegations, you can do all kinds of crazy cool.
Sure, yeah, and then obviously we're not going to be able to cover all facets of DNS because that's long and boring, very boring. Despite my shirt that says "I love DNS" or whatever that symbol is, I something DNS. It is quite boring. I'm surprised we still have people watching this, but.
DNS is such an archaic, part of the internet that, it's people kind of take it for granted a little, but they don't realize that, DNS in its essence hasn't changed since, the early 90s. You've layered on top some stuff on.
Yep. So one of the things that brings up a really good point, right? And this is sort of one of the things that I will never shut up about, is that DNS is one of the things that it's been around for a long time. It's pretty boring, like you said, but anyone who's ever rolled out IPv6 quickly realizes that you're not memorizing IP addresses anymore. It's just not happening, right? Like a lot of us that started, if you're doing V6, you gotta have DNS at least forward, because you're never gonna remember what things are, remember IP addresses or anything like that. And if you are, you're like Rain Man.
Yeah.
Vegas, and count cards. I can't do it. I've been doing V6 for 16 years or whatever, and I still don't even try. Even if it's a host file, right? It's once you start thinking about that, it's a critical piece. And admittedly, but you kind of have to have it.
And DNS is, it's not intimidating either once you understand the design of what you're supposed to do. It's not really, there's not a whole lot to it. You have records, you have forward and reverse names. You have syntax to the files, and that's pretty much it. You can do fancy stuff, but most people don't.
Yeah, I mean, you can do DNS can be that's an important fact. DNS can be as simple or as complicated as you want to make it. And to sort of touch on one of the things that isn't boring about it is that. So I've been a security guy off and on for a long, for working for a while. I go do security stuff for a couple of years, and then I come back. And one of the things that's really cool about DNS is it's almost never blocked. It's a core function of the network. So you're at the very least going to have a local resolver. And there are tools that are built that allow you to do cool things, circumventing security measures by tunneling stuff through DNS queries, like in UDP. So there's tools that can, like Corkscrew and some other stuff like that, that will allow you to say SSH via UDP packets to firewalls and filters and things like that, that's one of the cool aspects of DNS that is not really well traveled, but it's pretty slick.
That's interesting. Yeah, I've heard of something. Never really looked into it.
And
Yeah,
anybody
I've been a
who's
pen tester off and on.
Anybody who's ever gone through, the Microsoft certifications, knows how heavily, Active Directory and those now rely on DNS to function.
That's actually kind of a good point that you made, is that Microsoft has their own servers that a lot of people use, that's tied very, very heavily into Active Directory. One of the things, and this, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the Microsoft DNS server sort of spec to behind a perimeter, like a security perimeter, that doesn't allow queries against them, and I don't believe you can turn off DNS recursion. Fix that, but last time I looked, it was still unable to be disabled, so you had to filter it upstream.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the default behavior, and I'm not sure if you can turn that off. I think
they may have fixed it at this point, but
I know there's ways that they have. You can disable recursion with server 2008 and some things like that. But if you're running an Active Directory domain, you still need DNS pretty heavily.
Yeah. So you can disable it as of 2008.
Yeah.
For a while, you couldn't turn it off.
Yeah, I remember when I did my MCSA and server 2000. That was I remember something about recursion and not being able to fully disable it. It was still needed for certain things.
My MCSE is so old they didn't even have Active Directory. It's from the mid '90s. I've forgotten all. I think it was like NT4. It was real early in the NT4 days.
But I don't see anything yet. I've been doing some Googling. I don't see anything yet, though, on the ability to filter recursion. Which is, if you're doing recursion, you want to be able to filter it to be just, well, if you're doing authoritative and and recursion on a Microsoft box, I don't see a way for you to filter that. Your approved networks can use the recursion components.
That's what I was getting at. I don't think you can filter that. I thought maybe they had fixed that, but I guess maybe they didn't.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, you can either turn recursion off or on. You can't say only only allow recursion from this block or whatever. I think it's an all or nothing thing.
Yeah, I had a customer once. This was when I was at my last job, where we built the municipal broadband network. So they had a gig port into the fiber backbone, 10 gigs upstream, and they had a Microsoft but they insisted on having, /29 a public address space, and they put their services in that B server and DNS resolver. And so it kept popping up on Open Resolver list. I kept getting complaints that they were having issues with people were basically getting reflection attacks from them, and I ended up having to shut them off because they refused to turn off the to put it behind their perimeter. They wanted it in the public. I couldn't fire them as a customer; they were a stakeholder, but I unplugged them essentially because it was detrimental to network.
Sure.
That's a danger in the DNS world. So make sure that make sure that you're not being DNS admin. But there's so many so much documentation out there on how to build like a bind server, and it runs on everything. I mean, I learned it on FreeBSD, which is what I ran for the longest time. But bind is sort of the seminal resolver that most people use, and then there's lots of forks. Unbound, and then there's the Microsoft resolver, which at one point was actually based on bind back in the day, I think.
Yep.
DNS, there's DNS mask, there's no end of those things. I'd be surprised if the MikroTik resolver is not based on DNS mask, actually. And the pfSense resolver is based on DNS mask, and it's very portable. But again, I don't know for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I tell everybody, I know Mike likes Unbound, and other people like others, which is fine. But if you're, hey, I want to do this myself, you're not going to have a shortage of how do I set up bind, how do I make it do this, how do I lock it down, and the most important thing to me is, like you say, it comes with like everything. I can install a CentOS box. I can install an Ubuntu box, check the DNS server box. It's going to install bind, and it's going to work. I don't have to compile anything, and I don't have to worry about, if I do CentOS and I want to do a chrooted bind server, it's going to do it for me. And it's, me as the human, I'm not going to miss some flags or something like that when I'm compiling it.
Yeah, I mean it's available in just from like everything, and it runs. I mean, I've run a recursive bind resolver on a Raspberry Pi with a huge amount of queries, like a crazy amount of queries, and it's very efficient. If you're not logging queries, which is something that you may want to do on the short term to help root out issues and security problems. If you're not down on the Pi, then run your those, put them in a wipe pod, right? Geographically diverse locations. You got 2 recursive resolvers for $150.
No.
Seriously, I mean they will. And I've never used Bound. I've heard really good things about it, but at least for me, since like Bind 4 something, so it's I can do it in my sleep.
Sure. You have to. I know some of the questions were, why do you pick what server? And I couldn't, because I wouldn't care that much. But one could talk for hours as to why you pick one server over another.
Oh yeah.
So
Ford versus Chevy.
You have to.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, the best server is the one that works the way you want it to, that you can support.
Yeah, I think Wikipedia has a decent comparison chart of DNS servers and features, and then you just you gotta look there. You'll have to look up what the features are if you're at this stage of learning DNS servers. But you have to look and see if you care about certain features. That narrows down to which servers you can use. Then just give them a shot. Try. I'm sure there's guides for all of them out there. And
yeah.
if you don't like the
Yeah.
way it
There's a
installs,
lot of great documentation.
But yeah, just random things I'm thinking of before the end, the things people have asked me. Why have them on separate servers? Your authoritative. Well, if you configure your resolver or your recursive correctly, all you have to ever do with it is apt to get updates. That's all you have to do. There's no configuration. You just leave it alone, and then you can implement your filtering there. There's no chance of some sort of compromise of your authoritative box doing other things. You simply disable recursion on your authoritative box. It's just a simple security measure. If the server isn't allowed to perform that function, there can't be a bug in its filter. It just doesn't do it.
And the thing a lot of people may not understand about DNS is it's not intensive. You can spin up DNS servers, all day long, and you're not chewing up large amounts of, resources. Just like he's saying earlier, just like Nick was saying earlier, you can run it on the Raspberry Pi. You can run a full-blown DNS server on a Raspberry Pi, and it'll use up probably 2% of the CPU to do DNS.
I just got an idea. An older functional Android phone. Root that, compile a DNS server for it. It has a built-in battery backup. It'll run for hours.
There you go.
That would work. I bet you could get DNS master pretty well on that, because that's the thinnest one I think to date. I mean, it kind of just does its thing. It's not really what I'd consider to be a full recursive resolver, but I bet it would run on an Android phone like a top.
My phone, it's got like 4 gigs of RAM in it. I can't think of the last phone I had that had less than 1 gig. So I mean, DNS works.
That's 4 times what's in a Raspberry Pi. So.
Yeah, that's far more RAM that you need to do DNS for anything short of a university with 30,000 students or whatever. But
yeah, the
note,
Raspberry Pi works very well.
I don't recommend using the Android phone as your ISP's DNS server. Just sort of something I mentioned.
Oh, I say do it. See what it does. I'm kidding. But realistically speaking, the Raspberry Pi does actually work with a shocking amount of requests per second.
Okay. Is there anything we haven't talked about as far as DNS? We've been talking for almost an hour. I can't imagine anything else people would want to hear.
I mean, the biggest things with DNS is just follow a lot of the best practices with in terms of security.
Security. Always security.
Yep. Because that's one of the most attack services out there, just because it's so easy to attack a default host. You set up a recursive DNS server and don't lock it down, they're going to find it pretty darn quick. And historically,
20 minutes.
Yeah,
you're around for that.
And historically, I can't speak on the other ones, but historically, Bind has had some some security holes. And people go after it because it is a core service of the internet. So I'm sure any DNS server is just constantly bombarded for backdoors and things like that. So by default, if you install Bind, and at one point they discover a bug or a hole in it, if you haven't locked it down correctly, it's going to get exploited.
Yeah. So at least Bind ISC, the overarching company or entity that controls Bind, is pretty fast to release their updates. And then, most of the major distributions are pretty quick to adopt those at that point. But that's a really good point, is, you run your own DNS, authoritative or recursive, keep it up to date, maybe even do automatic patching of it, although make sure you watch it. 'Cause if it breaks, it'll make the network look like it's broken.
Yeah, I mean, I have most of my servers set to, there's very few packages that I let it install automatically. Everything notifies me. But, bind is one of them that I just say, hey, go ahead and install it, and be done with it.
Yeah, I don't think that's a bad call. I mean, a couple of the other things just real quick. I know we've been yammering on for a while about this, but there's a lot of things that are much easier than maybe folks have looked at running their own DNS server in the past, that have changed significantly, in newer versions of Bind, is things like macros to define a big set of records rather than typing every record out individually. All that's been simplified at this point. But there's no real reason not to reinvestigate, for no other reason than the CDN.
So yeah, I mentioned those macros probably help a lot for doing reverse IPv6 entries.
Huge help for any reverse entry, but yeah, especially V6. And if you've got blocks dedicated to CPE, you can say, CPE is these, here's the criteria that's all my CPE is going to be in this, and it's going to match octet, whatever, and then main. You put in like 2 lines, and you've got your entire set of CPE for that segment covered with forward and reverse DNS, which is a big deal. It simplifies it substantially.
Anything else you got, Justin? Or I think we're about good to put a bow on this.
Yeah, I think we've probably talked about it.
And of course, we didn't hit everything, so go ahead and post us up, just to post on our Facebook, asking us, what your questions are, comments to this video. People will see it and answer. If you're in a situation where you're not doing the things that we've said in this video that you need to do, don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to say what you are doing. This is one of those fundamental things that you should do, so people will help you. And if you can't do it, I think I know a consultant that can probably help walk you through that.
The thing, DNS is like BGP. There's enough best practices out there that if you follow, the best practices that, either the package, whether it be Bind or Unbound or whoever has set forth, in addition to what the community, the internet community as a whole does, then you're going to make, it sounds campy or whatever, but you're going to make the internet better. The more people who follow those best practices are going to, just make the internet better for everybody.
I'm envisioning one of those Park Service commercials. Only you can make the internet better.
Yeah, I'm envisioning the little the guy from Fallout 4, the very 50s campy guy saying, "You can make the internet better."
Alrighty. Well, I know that Greg usually wraps these up with what everybody's going to be doing shortly, and I'm tired and I don't care what you're going to be doing shortly. Well, then I guess I'll be seeing Justin tomorrow.
Yeah.
So anyway, hopefully this was of service to somebody, and we didn't just waste 3 or 4 man hours. So I guess talk to you guys later.
I had fun.
All right.
All
Good
right.
deal. Well,
Thanks.
Well, at least 3 of us got something out of it.
I enjoyed it.
Let's go ahead and shut this thing off.